But the lefty revolution, it did come our way come 2022. Hence why we have the current Prime Minister, and Airbus Albo is the nickname that I just have to keep using because I know how much they love it. The Prime Minister currently doing a brief stopover in a exotic international destination called Canberra. Yeah, I don't know whether is there a Lonely Planet guide to Canberra, but that is where he's currently for the next couple of days. Of course, he is flying around the world at such a rate that he is clocking up as many kilometres it would take to fly to the moon and beyond. Perhaps by the end of his prime ministership, it'll be Mars, turn around, come back, or is he going to keep going all the way to Pluto? We'll all find out together. Of course, the media are never very critical of overseas trips because they get to go on them. Never forget this, where if you play the game of access and you stay in with the Prime Minister and you stay in with his media team, you get the chance to go and cover the Prime Minister. All it requests is that, of course, you don't ask him any domestic questions because this Prime Minister believes when I'm overseas, when I'm flying to the moon and beyond, I cannot be asked a domestic question. Well, as you know, the economy in Australia, it is hurting normal people like yourself. Well, you feel the python squeeze and the media let you down when they don't ask the Prime Minister of such questions. But polling and the reality of the economy in Australia means the Prime Minister, well, he comes back to this country with a thud during his brief stopover before heading off to the United States to meet with the President of China and the President of the US, who he, of course, met just a couple of weeks ago. The reality in the opinion polling again shows that the clear biggest chunk of people think the economy is only going to get worse in the next little while. In fact, in the next month, 46% of people say that things are going to get worse. In terms of the next 6 months, it's 50%, 47% in the next 6 months, and 41% in the next year. And interestingly, another polling company did some interesting research, and this is one that often informs how the Teals behave, but still, Redbridge is the organisation, and they say that the Australian public is frustrated because the Prime Minister is not doing something about cost of living for the majority of people and the housing crisis. And I've got some details for that in a moment or two's time, particularly for how hard it is for people to rent in this country. A new report, if you're not sitting down, you better do it now because it is very difficult. Of course, the treasurer of the country, we call him Grim Jim because the reality is the numbers of the economy that he's actually overlooking for you are quite grim. Your wages or the worth of them have gone backwards. The value of the Australian dollar has gone backwards, which means everything we import into the country costs more money. You pay more tax. He looks okay because he ends up with a budget surplus, but you end up suffering because of inflation. 35% of people say that he is the one who bears the most responsibility when it comes to getting inflation under control. More than double that of the Reserve Bank, and even more than the people who say they're equally to blame. Now, again, another access point about all of this, and I'll get to some comments Judith Sloan made today in the Australian newspaper. They help inform the view. And again, if you're a casual viewer who's watching us for the first time or hasn't seen us for a while, I try to show you the receipts, not just give you an opinion, but show you the data, the information that leads to what we believe to be the informed opinion that we serve up to you each and every night. Now, immigration right now is something that is going to be a significant issue, as Judith Sloan wrote today. When you've got hundreds of thousands of people coming in this year, hundreds of thousands next year, 900,000 in the next 2 years, 1.5 million people over the next 3 years, then that's an awful lot of people who need to live somewhere. It's also an awful lot of people who are trying to buy things, which means the price of things starts to go up. As Judith writes today, and she is far more exported on the economy than people like myself, but it marries up with what we've been saying. The biggest impact of the rapid growth in population is being felt in the housing market, particularly rental properties. The vacancy rate for rental properties are at historic lows in many parts of the country. It is one of the pivotal reasons for the elevated growth in the consumer price index. She's, of course, referring there to inflation. Now, inflation is calculated on every 3 months, but in the past few months, the ABS, the Bureau of Statistics, now gives us inflation data every single month. So it's not going to be a mystery about where the Reserve Bank is going to end up going. They, of course, make monthly decisions on interest rates to deal with inflation. And this government would be regretting that we now get the monthly data on inflation. Because while the overall headline figure has got a 5 in front of it, have a look at the sorts of things and how much you are paying for them. Like petrol. We bang on about it every night because it matters. He's got $20 billion to cut, if he wanted to, the fuel excise by, as we say, 5 cents It'll cost him $3 billion for 6 months, but nothing. In the meantime, you pay 19% more for electricity. Sorry, for automotive fuel, 18% for electricity. Why? Because this government is taking us from one electricity system to another. It costs trillions of dollars to do, and you have to pay for it. The same with gas. Things like bread and cereal grown in this country, still the best part of 9%. Insurance and financial services. Now, if that was insurance alone, that'd be way higher, because anyone who's attempted to get insurance for the house, the boat or the car knows that is up way more than it was this time last year. Dairy, housing, food, all of it way above average. But tonight I want to particularly focus in on some data about how difficult it is for people to rent. It literally is the last line of independence when it comes to having somewhere to live. If you don't own something, then you have to rent something. If you can't do it on your own, you end up sharing it with other people. The other option is, of course, to move back in with other members of your family, and then, for sadly too many Australians, in fact, a record number of Australians, more Australians than ever before in our history, they are homeless. And according to these numbers, those homeless numbers are going to get worse. Why? Because according to this data today, rental affordability around the country is getting worse. The worst it has ever been. Think about the difficulties and all the different things that we've been through during our lifetimes. This is apparently some of the worst it's ever been. SGS Economics put this together in collection with, as you can see, a bunch of other groups, and they put out today the Rental Affordability Index. This is their report. Now, it gets quite complicated, it gets quite granular, it gets quite detailed. Basically, Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, all unaffordable if you're a pensioner living by yourself, let alone in a relationship. But if you are a single full-time parent, it is unaffordable to rent in Greater Sydney, unaffordable in Melbourne, unaffordable in Brisbane. Now, how do they come up with this number? Well, basically, if you're spending any more than about 30% of the money that you get each and every week on your accommodation, well, that is starting to create a situation where you are under rental or financial stress, and therefore most of the properties, if there are any, available in Sydney, Melbourne or Brisbane are too expensive for somebody who is a single parent working full-time. What about a couple where only one is working but you have kids? Greater Sydney, unaffordable. Also, Greater Brisbane, unaffordable. Same with Melbourne. In terms of a couple who don't have kids but they're on the minimum wage, Greater Sydney is unaffordable. Greater Melbourne is moderately unaffordable. Greater Brisbane is unaffordable. Add to all of this the availability of rental homes, and that is as bad as it has ever been. I remember a friend of mine a couple of years ago said about southeast Queensland that this was a major issue that wasn't popping up anywhere in Australian politics. Well, now, of course, it is becoming a central issue. You see, the more people there are in the country, the more places you need them to go into. If there already isn't enough housing, and the housing that we currently have is going to be too expensive for the existing population, could somebody please explain to me why we're tipping in an extra few 100,000 and ultimately 1.5 million people to all of those queues, all of those lists? And amazingly today, after an elbow dozen of interest rate rises, 13 in total, the ANZ bank boss today said that home loans were only for the rich. This is the country that's being run by the centre-left. This is the country that supposedly is more compassionate than it was a couple of years ago. This is the country run by the people who promised to make everything better, but by which indices do they judge that? Sure, if they're talking about the federal budget, it might be fine. But if you need to pay off your car on finance, if you need to fill your car with petrol, if you need to pay off your mortgage or pay the rent or find somewhere to rent, all of it's worse. Now, you would have thought that this would have dominated question time today because it was one of the rare opportunities for the opposition to be able to look the government in the eye and ask them some tough questions. Well, they were otherwise distracted on important national security matters, but the government itself, which used to tell us that the number one priority was cost of living. Forget the $450 million on The Voice, forget the distractions of the Prime Minister. This has always been their focus. Well, today, question after question after question after question, they asked themselves had very little or nothing to do with cost of living. Instead, it's the real re-election strategy of the Albanese government. It is straight out of the playbook of Joe Biden, which is sure, Everything might be worse since you put me in charge, but the other guy, he's the problem.
A leader of the opposition who has nothing positive to offer the nation. Nothing positive.
But I do want to just finish by saying that we are not going to get a lecture on managing the integrity of the migration system by the leader of the opposition.
Order.
And that is the legacy of the Leader of the Opposition when it comes to defence. But it wasn't just defence. In Home Affairs, we see that the Minister took his eyes off the ball, as has been revealed by the Nixon Review. As the Health Minister, he sought to abolish bulk billing. His record speaks for himself. He was a ministerial wrecking ball.
And faced with that, the Leader of the Opposition and the team opposite says no. The member for Dixon shows no insight or learning the lessons of robo-debt.
Now, I get it. Politics is adversarial, but changing the subject to that degree is ridiculous.